Hey, Sunstone. This is John Hamer. I'm excited to share a little bit of my family history with all of you. You're probably familiar with the 20th century American dream of moving to the suburbs and having your own house and a couple cars and a couple kids, etc., picket fence. But the American dream of the 19th century was very different, as people's idea was to follow the frontier where there was cheap land because the government was expropriating it, stealing it from the Indians, and then allowing you to homestead it for cheap. And so as a result, the settlers were able to essentially build themselves up from nothing by clearing the land themselves, homesteading, and largely living off the land. So the crops and everything that they were able to make was most of what they had. What they could supplement with whatever they could make as profit, they would then be able to use to buy stuff that was from the manufactured society, which they call essentially bought-in stuff, as opposed to store-bought, as opposed to the stuff that they have to make. A lot of us are very far removed from this reality, and we don't even think of it. When we read about our Mormon ancestors in Kirtland and Missouri and Nauvoo, we're not remembering that all of the way life actually really was for all those people. In a lot of cases, it's very removed. But it isn't as far removed for me because when I was born, 5 of my great-grandparents were alive, including my mother's parents, Jim and Myrtle Greer, who had grown up in effectively 19th century America. It was early 20th century America, but it hadn't really, time hadn't really changed where they were from, which is the southernmost part of Illinois. So they lived in a town called Tunnel Hill, and it's in this area near Vienna, what they called it, Vienna, not Vienna, but Vienna, Illinois. And so my great-grandfather was just this amazing Southern storyteller, and my mom in the 1970s got a tape recorder, and she recorded all of his stories, and she compiled them into a couple books, and I want to just share a little bit of this with you because it's just I think amazing to be connected to this kind of past. So my grandfather says, back when I was a kid, a feller give me a little old hound pup. I went about 3 miles after it, and I got over there, and there wasn't a hair on that dog, but there was half a dozen fleas. And so we carried it home on a board, and when we got home, I got me a gallon of kerosene. I stuck that dog's back end down in it and turned it around and stuck the head down in it, and that got all the fleas off the dog. That was the best dog I ever went in the woods with. Old Jeff was his name. The first night he was out in the woods, we had to carry him to the woods, and he treed 3 possums. A fella offered me 50 cents for him. I said, nope, he's not for sale. It wound up, I was offered $100 for him after time I wouldn't sell him. I'll never forget old Jeff. He was one of the best coon dogs that ever run the bottoms, and we made around $300 every fall with that dog. You could just count on it every fall, $300. He just lived a little way off from the woods, and that poor old dog would go and stay all night long with a coon if you wouldn't go to him. Why, we killed coons, and we skinned them, and we stretched the hides, and we'd sell them, and we got money for them. We would take that to buy our clothes. And that dog never got no extra food, just scraps off the table. If there was anything left, why, the dogs and the cats got it, and if there wasn't, why, they didn't get none. So my mother took the scraps off and just put them on the ground. We didn't have nothing for them to eat out of like we do now, like pets do now in the 70s. And that darn cat run up, and Jeff snapped at the cat, and my mother got a pitchfork, and that dog must have known she was going to stick him with that fork. I was sitting on the porch, and there was a schoolhouse seat sitting there, and that dog came right out and sat down between my feet for me to protect him. So my mother, she come running up with that fork. She was going to stick that fork in that dog, and there was a tub of rainwater sitting there, and my dad, he never said a word. He just picked up that tub of water, and he throwed it all over my mother. Boy, he cooled her off, and boy, she took after him. They had a round and around there after a little while. She finally cooled off, and that was it. But she didn't get to stick that dog with she didn't stick that dog with that fork. Well, so anyways, you can get a sense of the flavor of it and what the way, they were living. And it's really a treasure that we have as a family, that all of these are preserved. So I encourage all of you who, you have older family members right now. They may don't date back into this kind of time period, but they lived in an era that is going to be different from the future. And so, take the time to interview them, ask them stories about what childhood was like, what their schooling was like, what society, what the kind of things they were interested in. Don't ask them about big historical events, because you can read about that in regular history. Ask them about lived life, and you'll always treasure it, and so will your descendants.